To buy a home or not to buy a home? It's a pretty big question and there's a lot of emotion involved with it. But today we're going to talk about some easy math that you can do to help make the decision as to whether you should buy a property or whether you should keep renting if that's what you're doing at the moment. So this is really directed towards first-time home buyers that are sitting there wondering, does it make financial sense for me to jump into the real estate market, or should I just continue staying where I'm at and paying the rent and pay? So what we're going to look at today are three different market segments. We're going to look at the single family market, townhouse market, and the condo market. And we're going to base it on the average price point for each of these segments, and then just use average rates and then look at your minimum down payment. Really going high level. Obviously, everybody's going to have a different situation when it comes to buying or not buying, but I'm going to do a very generic high level overview. And if you want to dive deep into your specific situation, you can always reach out to me and we can do a bit of a co-planning session individually and make sure we're doing the right thing for you. What I've done, and I've got some notes here to help me along the way here. I've taken the average price point, like I said. So we'll start with the single family house market. Right now, we're looking at roughly $1.1 million for a typical house. There are houses out there for $800,000. I've been seeing some in the sevens, but the average price point across the Okanagan market right now is 1.1. So on a $1.1 million house, the minimum down payment required based on the percentages that lenders need to see from the applicant to fund the mortgage, the minimum down payment is going to be $85,000. It's no small sum of money. I get that. And that might take a lot of people out of looking at the home ownership path right away. And that's why typically what we see is people do the stepping stone property. So they'll buy the condo, build equity in that condo over a little bit of time, sell that. That gets them into the townhouse, build equity in that. That equity gets them into the single family home. So that's typically what they get. However, if you're sitting in a rental right now and you have $85,000 or so, you've got the down payment requirements checked off. Fantastic if you, that's hard to do. And you should be looking at the next step in this process, which is making sure that financially it makes sense to get out of your rental and get a home ownership. And I said there's easy math associated with that. What I mean by that is go online, find a mortgage calculator, put in some basic numbers. So right now we're using 4.5% for an interest rate. Could be high, could be low, depending on your specific situation. You're looking at, like I said, a minimum down payment of $85,000. And because you're doing the minimum down payment, you're likely going to be limited to a 25-year amortization schedule, which is how long your mortgage lasts for. Okay. Add that. So if you're a $1.1 million house with $85,000 down at a 4.5% interest rate, your mortgage payment in total is $6,000. It's a lot per month. Don't get me wrong. However, that's not the math. The math isn't, is your rent less than your mortgage payment? Because mortgage payments are split into two different things. There's the amount of your mortgage that goes towards interest, and there's the amount of your mortgage that goes towards principal. So the real equation that you should be sort of crunching is your rent more or less than your interest? And the reason I say that is the rent that you're paying somebody, it's not your money. You're paying them to help them pay down their mortgage or build their own equity. That is most similar to the interest that you would pay on your mortgage. That's not your money. You're paying it to the bank as their pound of flesh for lending you the funds to own the home that you're in. So really, those two numbers are what we need to look at. And on a $1.1 million house, the interest payment in your first year, and this is important because I'm going to talk about this later, interest payment in your first year, you're looking at about $3,750. So that's probably, if you're living in a single family detached house right now, pretty close to what you're paying in rent. It might even be a little bit less, might even be a little bit more, but that is the number that you should be comparing. And if you're paying more in rent than that $3,750 in interest, it definitely makes sense to look at getting into homeownership. And none of this conversation today is going to touch on things like appreciation, which, over the last 30 years, we've seen 5.8% appreciation on average. So if you're looking at $1 million asset, that is a ton of equity that you could garner over the years. This is solely talking about right now, in this point in time, are you paying more in rent than you would be in interest? Because then it very much so makes sense to jump into homeownership. The other piece of all of this that, again, I won't talk about today because I don't have time for it, would be looking at a house with a mortgage helper. So having somebody pay money towards your mortgage payment, which means not only are you not just paying somebody else's mortgage, you're paying your own mortgage and your own principal pay down, and the tenant that's paying you money is now helping you cover the cost of that mortgage payment. So that's the quick, easy math on the single family detached. For the townhouse market, we're looking at an average price point of about $750,000. The minimum down payment for a townhouse at that point would be $50,000. Again, no small sum of money, If you have that saved though, and you're thinking about shopping and getting out there, you can do this math fairly quickly. Again, find a mortgage calculator. I've already done this on a $750,000 townhouse with a $50,000 down payment. You're looking at a total mortgage payment of $3,900. Again, that's not the number we're looking for. The interest on that is about $2,600. So if you're in a townhouse right now and your rent is more than $2,600, you should be talking to a realtor, asking about the types of townhouses you could get into for that $750,000 range, because there's lots that are cheaper than that. Some that are more affordable and some that are more expensive. But if you're paying more than $2,600 in rent right now, the interest you would pay on that mortgage is less than that. On a condo, so now we're looking at an average price point of about $500,000. And the nice thing about that is $500,000 is the threshold to get the minimum down payment requirements. So you're looking at a down payment requirement of 5% only. So I have 5% down payment on a $500,000 condo. You're looking at $25,000 down. That's doable. It's going to take some serious saving, but definitely doable to break into the housing market. With a $500,000 condo and $25,000 down, you're looking at a $2,600 monthly payment for your mortgage. Of that, the interest out of that is $1,750. So again, calculation here is your rent that you're paying right now in your condo more than $1,750? If it is, you should be looking at potentially jumping into homeownership. Now, there's a sort of a concern that a lot of people would bring up at this point, which is if I own the property, then all the maintenance is on me. I've got a strata fee to pay. There's taxes. Yes, there's no doubt there are additional expenses when you own a property compared to renting it. When you rent it and the hot water tank goes, the landlord replaces the hot water tank. But there is a reason that landlords are okay with that. And that's because the rent that you're paying them is building their equity in the property, because it's going towards their mortgage payment and paying down their principal, like we just talked about. And they're getting that appreciation, that 5.8% year over year on average to own the place that you're living in, more than outweighs the additional expenses that you're going to see by being a homeowner. So that's why there are people out there willing to buy properties and rent them to people, because it makes sense over a long enough time horizon to continue owning it. And if you crunch this math, you'll probably see that it makes sense for you too. Now, I talked about something earlier. I said the first year mortgage payment, or the first month even. What I mean by that is the amortization schedule that I also talked about. What that is your mortgage payment stays the same throughout that 25 years, or if you're doing more than the minimum down payment, you could get out to 30 years, but let's call it 25 years for now. That mortgage payment stays the same, but the mix of principal and interest changes over time. So you actually see the amount of principal that you're paying at the beginning is quite low. And as you get through that mortgage schedule and you get towards the end, it gets very high. And the interest does the opposite. You pay more interest at the beginning and you pay less interest as you get towards the end. So if you're looking at a property and you're thinking you might live in it for 5 years, these numbers get even better. So I ran the math on this as well. For a condo, you're looking at about a $400 a month swing 5 years into your mortgage schedule. So you're paying $200 a month more towards principal and $200 a month less towards interest. On the townhouses, that number goes to $600 a month swing. And on the single family, you're looking at almost a $900 a month swing to the better. So more principal pay down and less interest. So that's why doing this early, getting into it early, working through that amortization schedule really is going to help you see more benefit as you go along the way. And again, make the idea of getting into home ownership much more palatable, and hopefully make much more financial sense to you by being able to do this really simple math to figure out what makes more sense. Do I keep renting because it's less than what I would pay in interest, or should I look at home ownership because my rent is more than what I would pay in interest? So I hope this was helpful. I've got another video out there that talks about strata fees, because I know that's something that people bring up all the time. Feel free to watch that one. So I hope this helps you guys decide whether it makes sense to get into home ownership or whether it makes more financial sense to keep staying where you're at. And again, the numbers are quite simple. Find a mortgage calculator, figure out what the interest payments would be on your mortgage. And if you're paying more than that in rent, probably makes sense to start chatting with a realtor and looking at houses that would suit your specific criteria and see what the payments are going to look like on a home like that. And then you can really make a super informed decision whether it makes sense to look at getting into home ownership or it makes sense to hang tight where you're at. If you want to talk about your specific situation with me, you can find me at darcyfiander.ca, or you can email me at darcy@vantagewestrurealty.com. Thanks for watching this. I hope you guys found it helpful, and stay tuned for more videos.